Hello, and welcome to the Oregon Business Matters podcast, brought to you by Oregon Business and Industry, your statewide chamber of commerce. At Oregon Business Matters, we focus on insights, issues, and initiatives that impact Oregonians' shared prosperity and the state's economic health. I'm Angela Wilhelms, the president and CEO of OBI, and your host here at Oregon Business Matters. And today I'm talking with Cara Turano, president and executive director of the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network. The OEN, per its mission, helps early stage entrepreneurs in Oregon and Southwest Washington, but we're not going to worry about them today, by providing education, guidance, connection, and financial opportunities. I'm so happy to be with Cara. We are actually in Klamath Falls. We're both here for an economic summit and figured what do two people do on the night before an economic summit? They record a podcast
about entrepreneurship. Yeah.
So also joining us tonight, you should know, is Toby, Cara's adorable dog, who is bouncing between participating in our podcast and cleaning the floor of the hotel room. So that's fantastic.
Perfect.
But back to the point here tonight. Entrepreneurs play a critical and often overlooked role in Oregon's business ecosystem. And the state needs thriving businesses to provide jobs, generate tax revenue, support innovation and philanthropy. And entrepreneurs play a critical role in that as people who start businesses. Mm-hmm. A state that supports entrepreneurs and creates the right conditions for their businesses to grow will enjoy many benefits that come with their success. So, Cara, thank you for joining me. Let's talk a little bit about how Oregon's doing in that space.
I would love to. It's my favorite topic of conversation.
Okay, great. Well, why don't we just start with some basics? Tell our listeners a little bit about the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network, or OEN. You know, how long has the organization been around? What does it do? Just the nutshell for us.
Absolutely. So OEN is celebrating its 35th year this year, and we are best known for connecting innovative, potentially highly scalable companies, regardless of industry and location in the state, with capital. So we have a marquee program that we've done for over 20 years where we connect local angels or folks interested in angel investing to early stage founders that are thinking about taking venture on for the first time. And in the process of that, we do all of the regular technical assistance that you would assume: legal, financial, marketing, pitch deck practice, for about 615 entrepreneurs across the state and Southwest Washington as of last year.
That's fantastic. And I actually got to meet one of them just a little bit ago. And I think I love hearing their stories, and I love hearing how they light up when they know that they've got someone there to help them and support them. You can just see it, how much it means to them.
Yeah, it's something you don't really think about. Like, we don't really all walk out of the womb knowing how to start a business. In fact, very few of us do. And we have great ideas, but then, like, what comes beyond the great idea? And that's the fun part of what we do at OEN, is like, we're not the idea organization. We're the ones that are like, okay, you have a business plan, you have an idea, like, how do we get you to start selling that, scaling that, building that company here and hiring people? And that's what we consider fun. Yeah.
And how did you get into this? Tell us a little bit about your background.
I joined a tech services startup in the late 90s. My dad told me I should take the job because I was going to be rich. I did not really understand the difference between a product company and a services company. So I did not get rich, but I had this really neat opportunity where I was the 17th employee. I was 24 years old. It was tech. It was like right past the bubble burst. And we scaled that company over the course of a decade to 350 people in 5 states, and then were ultimately acquired by a $12 billion global consultancy. So then at 34, I did make a little bit of money, and I was told I was a redundancy, which no one mentioned in the mergers and acquisitions process. And so that was my crash course in entrepreneurship, and I've always then sort of gravitated in my nonprofit, either tech association and now entrepreneur support organization work, into that general operator of being a founder, because I've done it.
Yeah, what a great background. And you can really identify then with the entrepreneurs that you're working with.
Yeah, all the mistakes and all the amazing, unique opportunities that you get to have.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that because I think that's an interesting way to phrase it. Entrepreneurship is hard and it's fraught with you make decisions all the time, and inevitably you're going to make some mistakes along the way. What are some of the pitfalls and challenges that entrepreneurs face as they get started?
I think the number one thing that we see is people that are so in love with their idea that they can't change it. And the entrepreneur you met this evening is working on a circular economy golf tee where you take the golf grip and then you turn it into a rubber tee, and they don't break and they can be used much longer, and you're taking essentially garbage and creating a new product. And our conversation became around rubber stiffness and how it's getting really difficult with that slim amount of rubber to make a tee that's stiff enough. And I said, "You're in love with your idea." And she was like, "I know. And there's this like whole indoor golf industry, and I could just remold the tee and do the same thing and probably like scale much faster." And I was like, don't be so in love with your idea that you can't get past it. And I think like that's the biggest mistake we see, is that you can't get past your big idea that you're in love with, and you're not really sure if there's a market for it. And then everything kind of behind that is like the lack of resilience or able to take feedback. And then it gets technical. Like nobody knows how to put together a financial spreadsheet.
Yeah, well, that's true. There's a lot to learn. And so again, it's good that they have an opportunity to get that counsel and advice to help with the things they don't know about, whether it's one thing or many things.
Multiple things.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about some of the success stories.
Yes.
I'm sure you've worked with some very successful entrepreneurs. In fact, I know you have. I've met others of them. What stands out to you? I'm not going to make you pick favorite child, but what stands out to you when you think about some of those success stories about then what worked and how they overcame and built that resilience and overcame those challenges?
That's such a good question, because it's such a fine line. Like you can't be so in love with your idea that you're not willing to change, but you have to be in love with your idea or your innovation enough that you're willing to push it forward, when the reality is you're going to hear 99 no's before you hear yes from someone in an investor capacity. And I would, take that all the way down to banks. Like you're not going to hear yes immediately. And so the number one trait that we see is just that grit and resilience and that creativity to take your idea and move it along a path to actually gain traction in a customer market and sell it, and then know enough to stop there and focus. And I think that's a big challenge, is focus, to really see something through and grow it. I mean, I think some of my favorite stories from the state of Oregon are all food based. Like, who would have ever thought that it would be drive-through coffee or ice cream? And I think if you asked any of those founders right now what their first initial years were like, they would tell you it was a lot of no's. So it was persistence in coming up with an idea that actually sold.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too. And you talked in there about the need for capital, the advice and counsel that they get. You talked earlier about, angels and those who are willing to put their own wealth and capital in to support these entrepreneurs. I often remind everyone that every big business started as a small business. Mm-hmm. You don't just birth a giant, company. They start small. Many of them don't succeed. Some grow to be really large, and a lot, grow to be successful. But, maybe not huge. And I think the point there is that this is an ecosystem. Yeah. And it requires, the folks with capital, whether that's individual or commercial capital, to invest. It requires, people willing to be those independent agents and have the ideas and everything in between to support that ecosystem.
I mean, I agree completely. And I think this is something that's really misunderstood, is just the capital world, and particularly like the capital world that we live in, because there has been a lot of policy change to allow things to look different from an investment side. This is one of the ideas that we've been noodling on at OEN, is how do you increase community investment capital? And there's a couple of ways to look at that. I think the VC mindset is you invest money, you have this huge return, and then you get more money, And that is outside of the confines of what is happening in a community. So now you have platforms like we start as early as Kiva with micro loans, which we have a great Kiva network in the state of Oregon, particularly in rural Oregon through our partners at the Foundry Collective. And then you could do something like a We Funder, which is a way to be an angel investor without being accredited. And it's $100 buy-in. And those companies tend to be restaurants or retail or clothing, things that are not going to be traditionally venture backable. And that's a really interesting way to do capital. There's another platform called Honeycomb Credit, which allows you to do both lending and investment based on what the founder wants. And there's, again, a risk profile associated with that. Like if you're a lender on that platform, you have a 97% return, but your return rate is like 1% of what you invest in. And then if you think that you are interested in angel investing and you have that accreditation, which I'm always happy to talk about, it's a math number, right? Think about investing in a local business in your community. There's ways that you can structure it that is a loan where that money comes back to you with a percentage return, or you're talking about taking some equity. And yeah, there's a risk in that. But at the end of the day, like if the company closes and you lose your money, you're still essentially writing that off the same way that you would a charitable donation. And so I encourage people to think about leveraging their wealth to support community growth from an economic development standpoint, which is investing in one of those businesses in their community or that they think is really interesting.
Yeah, it's a way for a lot of different people to take part in that entrepreneurial ecosystem, even if they're not the entrepreneur.
Correct. And then the impact is so much greater than what you could potentially make. The impact is jobs created in your community, wealth generated in your community because of that, tax dollars to pay for schools. So there's this virtuous cycle. And I think that's the language and framing that we want to have about it, that it's not just like what you can earn, but what that impact could be throughout your entire community.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. And I'm sure a piece of this that a lot of people aren't thinking about, it feels distant or intangible to them. And in fact, it's not.
It's not. And I think that's it. Like people assume an investor looks a certain way, and that is not the narrative anymore.
It's interesting. Well, let's talk about Oregon for a little bit, because that's what we do. So let's talk a little bit about in what ways Oregon is a good place to be an entrepreneur. I know there's lots of them. And maybe share a little bit about in what ways Oregon is a frustrating place to be an entrepreneur.
That is a great question. Oregon always ranks very high on entrepreneurship scales and has forever. We are a super innovative culture. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we're a massive state with a very low population. So we've had to figure out a lot on our own. We are a really easy state from the nuts and bolts to file a business license. There is no fee, so people file them all the time. We have a large per capita of entrepreneur support organizations, like what OEN does. We are one of probably 300 across the state, and that does not include the small business development centers that we know are also located statewide. And I think the other thing that makes Oregon a great place to start a business is just our general culture of going for it. Like we're risk takers. Like you move to Oregon and that was the wild, wild west. And I think there's still a part of that. And so because of it, we're just very supportive of each other. And that I think is really inspiring. And then where it's challenging, I think we have capital here that we can access that we don't. And sometimes I noodle on that could be because we are spending our money in other ways from, a tax perspective. I know that's something that we hear from local angels. I think it's really hard to grow a business here because we don't have what we would refer to as growth stage capital. And so what we see is out of state capital coming in. And I think that because of some of the challenges we have around housing, that it's difficult from a workforce perspective. And some of the innovation is so cutting edge. Like, how are you compensating for that growth in a potential future workforce? And I don't know that we have that quite figured out at the lower education, high school education standpoint yet. We have great universities, but we're not a really great state for college graduates. In fact, like we rank very low for college graduates coming here. So those are some of the challenges. But I will say, I know you have a question coming up, but we have some great stats, and like we do have a lot going for us. And I think that if we could move some of these companies forward, it would just then birth even more of this innovation and entrepreneurship growing here.
Yeah, we'll talk about those. I mean, let's dive into some of the statistics. Our people who listen to this podcast know that we love numbers.
We
and
love
stats.
statistics.
So yeah, share some of those because I do think they're fascinating, and I think they're when you stop and think about them, if you're an Oregonian and you've been here for a while, they're actually not shocking, but they're really impressive.
They're so impressive. And I think this is where I get so excited about what we have here at our fingertips. So per capita, Oregon is the 4th most innovative state in the country, and that is based on patents filed across any kind of engineering and science background. And that, I think, is so impressive. And then we have some like unique things to Oregon where we have a large number of women that are in executive leadership roles, period, across all functions. And you see that in our government and our large corporations here. And that funnels down to a large number of women entrepreneurs. So we rank within the top 5 of women entrepreneurs whose businesses are earning $1 million or more per year, which I think is a really, really interesting statistic. And then because of some fantastic policy decisions, the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Foundation actually ranked us 3rd for Black founders, I think maybe 2 years ago. And that is an intersection of policy, capital, and wraparound support services. And I think those are things that we need to be really proud of because it is a attraction strategy for entrepreneurs into a community to hear and know those things.
Yeah, it's, I mean, you hear about this in a lot of industries. And I got to think it's the same here too, where success begets success. So people want to flock to a place where they know that there's a culture of innovation and creativity already, but then there's also, you know, a network of support and a culture of support for them as entrepreneurs. So hopefully we can build on that.
There's a book about that called The Startup Communities, published in 2012 by Brian Feld, and second edition came out in 2020, and they actually talk about that, and it's called the Boulder Hypothesis, that you can do innovation anywhere, and it's a concentration of investors, entrepreneurs, and services, and it doesn't necessarily limit itself to being in urban cores.
Yeah, so I think that we do have that going for us, and we should celebrate that. But I also understand that we maybe rank a little differently when it comes to the sustainability or long-term success of those companies. So can you talk about that?
Absolutely. Well, number one, the regulatory environment is incredibly challenging, which I think we've learned over the last several years working with our founders. When you are waiting for permitting and you are burning through your capital and your runway is 6 months and you can't get permitted to do something in that 6 months, like you're done. And so that's incredibly frustrating. I think it's really frustrating that when you get successful, that you hit that $1 million, which for a lot of our founders takes a long time. But once that happens and the taxes kick in, it is just not as appealing. And then I think what you see in my perspective, I think there are some people that would disagree with me on this front, but when you have outside investment come in and they're looking at how they're making money on their investment, a high tax burden does not necessarily align with that. And I think you and I heard it too when we were at your event in October, that you grow to a certain scale and then it just gets difficult to recruit some of the talent that we don't have here. And then it's the intersection of housing and taxes, and you see companies having to grow elsewhere, which is frustrating. And I think that doesn't encourage investment in our state. Companies that are growing here, and then the really disappointing part in that for me is when a company does really well and their investors make money, they're not here, and so that wealth is not concentrated here, which it could be to then go back into more companies, more philanthropy, and just the general growth of our economy.
Yeah, I mean, we, through policy decisions, have created a great place for people to start, and then maybe a less great place for people to be able to stay, or for that wealth to be able to stay. We actively sort of drive it out.
Yeah.
Create an incentive for it to go somewhere else. And I'm sure many of the people listening know, but the $1 million threshold you're talking about is when the corporate activity tax kicks in, and it's a gross receipts tax, which is especially challenging for low margin businesses and entrepreneurial businesses, where they're trying to reinvest every dollar into growth and R&D and other things that are going to help them scale and become a more sustainable long-term business. And then suddenly you get saddled with a tax on your gross sales as opposed to profit. And it completely can kind of upend the formula.
And it's a mismatch in where I think we're really good at entrepreneurship is the fact that we are a great community of creators, and we create things that are big and that cost money. And if you're creating a product that is expensive and you're making $1 million by selling one product, but all the machinery that you need to do that is exponentially more expensive, like I think we're limiting our ability to scale some of the growth in industries that we are so good at.
Yeah, I mean, I think about manufacturing. You know, OBI is the state's affiliate for the National Association of Manufacturers. So this has a special place in our heart. But I think about manufacturing and the history that has in the state, where we've been a manufacturing economy for a long time. Historically, we've always punched above our weight. Mm-hmm. Manufacturing jobs pay more at every level of educational attainment than non-manufacturing jobs. And so there's a lot of benefit there. But when we think about Oregon relative to other states, we often see, I like your word, mismatch. For us, it's a competitive mismatch. Other states are actively thinking about how to allow for depreciation expensing for capital equipment, or, preferential treatment on, whether it's exemptions or credits for capital equipment purchases, or R&D tax credits, which are very common as a tool across the country. And we are deficient in every single one of those, and at risk of falling even further behind with some of the current policy debates. And so I know a lot of the people you work with are in manufacturing. They're trying to make products. Mm-hmm. And so does that come up a lot? And do you see that as a competitive disadvantage in that sustainability and growth?
I do. And I believe it happens on both ends, because there's an enamorment with the normal VC mindset of probably a business to business, software as a service, $1 billion exit unicorn, which don't have a lot of upfront capital costs, but they also don't generally create a lot of jobs in the place where they are growing, particularly after COVID and us being able to work remote. And so where I believe Oregon's strength lies is in more of these capital intensive upfront industries. So there's a lot of investment that needs to be made upfront to see success. They create a ton of jobs. And then the mismatch on the back end is that there is no depreciation, tax incentive to keep them here when it's already taken so much to ramp. And like, that's the cycle that I find so frustrating. Like I can tell you more than anecdotally that we have so many value add food manufacturers that want to stay here and cannot find a place to manufacture. And it does not make sense, or they cannot find a building that is permittable for them to do what they want to do to scale their company in Oregon. And then the manufacturing goes to Colorado or Florida or somewhere else. And it's just really hard when you work day in and day out with these companies and you want to see the jobs grow here to hear that that's the reality of their business landscape.
Yeah, it is frustrating. And those aren't the stories that, are widely known, because these are folks who are head down, trying to do this. And, there isn't a lot of coverage about that. So I think the policymakers maybe just don't understand. So I appreciate your work in trying to help educate them with those real life examples and the work that your entrepreneurs are doing.
Well, thank you. Founders are just so busy trying to keep their businesses running that they don't have time to share these things with legislators.
That's right. We tell folks that all the time, like entrepreneurs as well as, later stage companies, they're doing exactly what we need them to be doing, which is focusing on growing their business, creating jobs, creating economic activity that then generates wages and philanthropy and, of course, tax revenue. And that's what they need to be doing. Right. So, that's why we're proud to be able to do what we do as well, is to help tell those stories, because they're very busy and they're dealing with real world challenges every single day in the business.
And we're realizing at OEN as a C3 that we have an opportunity to work and partner with folks like you to share these stories and potentially bring some of this data to the forefront.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple other states that might be attractive for manufacturing. And I talk to my counterparts around the country, so I have my own sense of this. But are there a couple states that stand out to you as places that are just really doing a bang up job helping entrepreneurs? Like, who's ahead of us on those lists? Or who, maybe the better question is, who's ahead of us on that list for survival?
Arkansas. And I don't really know exactly what they're doing because they're so far not on my radar. But I will say, like, what we hear a lot is we have a great blue economy and a lot of folks thinking about sustainability and manufacturing in marine fleets and personal watercraft vehicles. And Michigan is eating our lunch there. I've heard, I think, at least 3 who have moved because they've gotten much better incentives to grow, which I find quite surprising. I don't know the outcome of this yet because it was implemented in 2025, but Illinois has a tech incubator grant program. And this one I found particularly interesting given, again, my adamance that we are a creator economy and should be building things. But the legislators in Illinois realized that the current business landscape is changing really quickly when it comes to technology, and that the incubator spaces that existed across the state did not provide the cutting edge equipment or AI integration that these companies needed. And so they have a grant program between $10 and $3 million to upgrade facilities for founders to get access to that equipment without having to make those upfront capital expenses themselves. And think about how you're incorporating modern tech into more, I call it hard tech, which is just like our terminology, but more product-based type of innovation. And so I'm curious to see how that turns out. And then there is a movement right now that started about 5 years ago, and there's 60 different policies that have been introduced around it called the Right to Start. And it is a entrepreneurial focused legislative agenda that says anybody should have a right to start a business, and it should not be limited to certain demographics or folks from certain backgrounds that have a certain amount of money. And each of those policies is written a little bit differently, but they have resulted in states creating offices of entrepreneurship, as well as metrics to hold their governments accountable for spending 5% with startup businesses. And that's actually a great way to move innovation forward that's not commonly used, I think, at a state or county level. It's called a demonstration contract. They're so difficult to find from the federal government because they're so secret that I could not actually find one. But it enables a government to purchase a technology and use it to give feedback, but also create some customer traction. And so I think those are just some interesting ideas that like don't actually involve changing much. That could be really helpful to some of our founders.
Yeah. And I think part of that too is we have to get in Oregon, at least from our opinion, we have to get over this notion that helping business is always just a giveaway of some sort. And I think there's really unfortunate messaging in that there is a return on investment here, and you can invest in companies at all stages, but including the entrepreneurial stage, and see a return for the state. economically as well as culturally and in community building. And so, we'll definitely study some of those policies too, and take a look at what other states are doing.
I think it's the most equitable thing you can do. I mean, you should not be limited in starting a business because you came from money or made money in a previous business, when we know 98% of venture capital goes to white men from 10 universities. So if you can figure out a way to get folks that don't necessarily have that access to capital as readily building businesses, I think the economy would look so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of opportunity out there. There are some challenges along the way. We're going to try to work through some of those. But there is a ton of opportunity. We're going to have to wrap it up here. I think Toby is already sacked out for the night, but he's done. So we probably should bring it to a close ourselves. But is there anything else you want to share with our listeners before, any parting thoughts before I let you go?
Yes. If you can support a small business or a startup in your community and you don't know how to do it, you can always reach out to us at www.oen.org. We would strongly encourage it. Founders and entrepreneurs live very lonely lives because they're working all the time. So I would encourage you to support one in your community.
That's great. Very good advice. One more time on the URL for folks.
www.oen.org.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This has been fascinating. We could talk for a long time about this topic, but we'll leave it there for this episode. I just want to thank you, Cara, for joining us today, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in. The Oregon Business Matters podcast is a production of Oregon Business and Industry, your statewide chamber of commerce. Our episodes can be found on all the top podcast platforms, so check out some of the other ones we've released. You can find them on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and on our website, OregonBusinessIndustry.com. Have a great day.